welcome back. We'll be starting up here. Just a few housekeeping items. So we're approaching the end of our first break. We're going to be launching into our Cisco Firepower overview by Craig Martin. We'll be displaying that shortly. In the meantime, I want to post in the link for the Teams room for those that may have joined late or rejoining. So here's the link for the WebEx Teams room. We'll be using this for the updated lab documents, guides, various links, and then for after today, we'll use it for Q&A for labs and validations. Any questions during the upcoming overview here on Firepower, please use the WebEx Q&A. So that's the WebEx Q&A panel for any questions during the overview. We'll have various subject matter experts and other people helping out to help answer your questions. After we get done with this is going to be a 2-hour session, and we'll be doing another 15-minute break plus or minus after this session, just as a heads up. So with that, I'll turn it over to Craig.
All right, Brad, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Brad, I thought you said this was 20 minutes, not 2 hours. So yeah, welcome everyone. My name is Craig Martin. I'm a network security engineer in the GSSO channel engineering organization. And we're going to go through network security here, and we'll touch on our agenda first. So yeah, as Brad said, we've got a couple hours. So strap on your seatbelts and open your eyelids, get some coffee. This is what we're going to hit. We've got a lot of stuff to go through here. We're going to get the architecture, go over the platforms, operating system selection, and then we'll hit on the features and one of my favorite topics, the next-gen firewall management. We'll hit the licensing, migration tools, a little bit of roadmap, kind of go back on. Yep. Is there a problem? Oh, I got some background noise there. I thought somebody was stopping me. Can you hear me okay, Brad?
Coming through great. There's just some random background.
Okay. We're not going to go through a roadmap in the future. We're going to kind of just go through a tour of kind of where we've been and where we're going, what our vision strategy is, and then we'll end with the technical programs and a lot of great resource links for you. So let's get started. So architecture. This is still one of my great visualizations that I really like to show how Cisco integrates security because of the color and the breadth of the portfolio, which is extremely large, probably the largest in the industry. Cisco's reach and breadth of our portfolio is very, very large, as you can see. And with the different features that are on the left in the little panels there that have colors, they've got little dots that kind of show which product on the right is connected to another product with a certain feature. There's a lot there. The point here is that I don't know of another vendor in the industry that has this breadth of a portfolio and this much integration and enables not just integration and automation within the Cisco portfolio, but outside of it with third-party security products and vendors. And that really makes us unique in the industry. And it really provides a lot of value to customers. We're going to go through all that from a firewall-centric perspective during this presentation. But this is really, really a great way to illustrate these integrations and the features and the contextual awareness that we're sharing and telemetry that we're sharing across the portfolio, all fed by Talos. Why Cisco Next-Gen Firewall? Well, as I said, we have a huge portfolio. It's integrated, as shown there on the right. Our firewall is very mature. We've got, the legacy ASA code. We've got the SourceFire Next-Gen IPS code, and we've got a lot of capabilities that we brought together with those two things to make us unique and best in class. We're now moving into, cloud application security and things like that. We've got layer 7 application visibility. We're going to get into some of the features more in the firewall. But the other thing is providing a consistent policy and unified visibility across not just the firewall, but all the other products in the Cisco security portfolio. Streamlining that. There are choices on the management side we'll get into. We talked earlier from product management with Bill Maben and Tish a little bit about the management and overlay feature capabilities there with Meraki and the next-gen firewall. And there are use cases for either or both of those things. And having our cloud management options, specifically like with CDO, Cisco Defense Orchestrator, we're now able to provide more visibility and a consistent policy management and deployment at scale using a cloud-delivered model. So here is some of these features and functions we're talking about that fit within each of these three categories. And we're going to double-click down on a lot of these, so I'm not going to read all of this. But if you're looking for integrated security portfolio on the right, how we integrate with Identity Services Engine and using the custom correlation engine capabilities in FMC for bringing the rapid threat containment feature in, using ICE to reach out to the network, and TrustSec now that we support in the firewall, the tight integration that we've always had with AMP for endpoints, and then the quick integration with Duo with multi-factor authentication, ACI, on and on. There's just a ton of value and a lot of deep, rich features here that customers get with our security solution overall. Not just firewall alone, but firewall is kind of the centerpiece of all that integration. Why do we still need firewalls? There's always going to be a firewall out there. Customers have to have it. It's like having certain things, in security, whether it's at your house or on a network. You have to have a firewall. You have to have antivirus. You have to have certain things. So we have very, very deep security controls for those customers that have security-focused IT staffs that need to get into deeper forensic research, threat investigation, analytics. Those things are part and parcel with our firewall. There's a network operations use case as well, and that's why we have a couple choices here on the management side and on the platform side as it relates to Meraki MX and it relates to the next gen firewall with FTD features. Now, Talos is our security threat intelligence organization, our threat research organization. They are the brains behind the brawn of our security portfolio, not just in firewall, it's every Cisco security product that gets touched by Talos. The telemetry that the devices, whether they're email, web, firewall, endpoint, etc., out there in a customer's network, that telemetry that's collected on that network gets fed back up to Talos, and our research team takes that information and does a host of things. We're obviously looking for vulnerabilities that are happening out there on platforms, operating systems, servers, endpoints, and things like that, devices, network devices. And we're always trying to be aware of what systems out there have vulnerabilities so that we can write signatures and identify, the behavior-based type of vulnerabilities so that we can update the engines, the signature-based engines and the anomaly-based engines in our products. Detection and research. So what are the latest threats that are going on out there? What are we seeing from those devices? And coming up with new updates to that and pushing them out periodically. Developing the product, enhancing the product through new detection capabilities, using big data analytics, using signatures, a combination of those things is what the Talos group does. Sharing that information with the community and having a global outreach through things like Beers from Talos, our podcast. Having threat intelligence feeds. So we don't just rely, our products do not just rely on Talos alone. Our products also integrate with third-party tools. We'll talk about Stix and Taxi and other third-party, our Cisco threat or third-party technology alliance partners. Talos works with those organizations too, so they are not just working inside and only focused on our products. They take feeds from other organizations and also share our data with other organizations. We truly are an ecosystem that's just not only focused on the value that Cisco brings, which is immense, but also the value of integrating third-party solutions and sharing that intelligence across that community so that customers are overall better protected and, just the health of the overall industry is good. So it's a big, big part of Talos. We've got a lot of numbers that we back up how we scale. We've kind of gotten away from the numbers game and showing how many more events, how many more samples of malware do we load, et cetera. We're still the largest private security threat intelligence organization in the world, but we're kind of not showing the numbers anymore and really abstracting that a bit with this information that I'm sharing right now. So this reaches across our portfolio, as I say, from the endpoint into the network and across the cloud. All of our products at Cisco are fed by Talos. That information is shared through third-party feeds that Talos gets, but also through the Talos feeds that are integrated directly with the product. And we also do things like, threat traps that are out there, honeypots. So there's a lot of other telemetry that we get from other sources than just our products alone and third-party products. So we are collecting things that we're not necessarily advertising out there through things like honeypots. Let's talk about the firewall platforms. And I'm just going to make a quick run through here the portfolio. This is the lineup from small to medium to large. One of the big values that we offer in the firewall industry here is our scalability and the ability to address customers who are very small, but ones that are very, very large, 100, the top 500 or top 100 customers that are out there that might have large data centers or want to go cloud. They can scale right up to over 300 gigabits per second, or ones that are really, really small. They have a lot of scalability and flexibility as well. They can start, from 500 or 600 meg and move all the way up across the portfolio. So these are the models. We have some new features and some new models that were released earlier this year. The Firepower 1000 series, the 1100 series. There were some new models that were added on there, and I'm going to hit each one of these real quick. Some of the new differentiating features that are in some of these. We also take our firewall software and instantiate that in virtual code. So we have applianced, purpose-built, high-performance models, which we saw in the previous slide, but we also, in the migration to the cloud, public and private cloud and hybrid cloud networking, we also have virtual instances of FTD running on these various platforms. So on the private side, VMware, KVM, and then with the public cloud, things like Azure and AWS, you can see the instances and models of each one of those cloud providers that we provide. Now, certainly, these aren't 300 gig models that are up there. Typically, customers who are deploying in the public cloud are doing this in a very segmented fashion, and they have purpose-built applications that they want to deploy in segmented areas of their public cloud infrastructure. And so these throughput levels in the public cloud for the virtual instances meet most of the use cases that are out there. But, we'll always, just like any technology, we'll be scaling as demand and these cloud providers need more bandwidth and whatnot in their cloud infrastructures. At the low end, the Firepower 1000 series. So there were some new appliances on the 1000 series, the 1010 and the 1120s, 40s and 50s came out. I believe it was earlier this year in the spring. I want to say the February timeframe. We don't have a date on here, but I think it was around as winter, early spring came, these were released. And they brought things like on the low end with the 1010, the integrated PoE and switching on the switch ports. And then on the 11, 20, 40, and 50s, then a higher throughput. You can see here these platforms go all the way up from 1 gig or 1.5 gig to 3 gigabits per second. All handle the same features that the large data center and enterprise class firewalls that the Fortune 100 would use. Those are available in these low-end SMB platforms as well here in the 1000 series. A little bit of picture of the back of the 1010, an overview here, the PoE interfaces. And then that was a desktop version. Here we have a rack-mounted version of the 1100s, and then new modular configurations with the 11, 20, 40, and the 50s, as I've said. A lot more scalability with physical interfaces. We have 1 gig and even up to two 10 gig interfaces now that you can run on the right with SFP inserts on those. So there's a lot of requirements for that type of physical connectivity. Obviously, the boxes don't do 10 gig throughput, but if you need 10 gig connectivity, you've got it with this box, and you can drive that up to 3 gigabits of performance at a very, very low cost performance capability. There's another thing that we supported in the 913 version of ASA code, which is called ASA appliance mode. By default, when you buy a 1000 series or a 2100 series, and you click off in your configuration the FTD software that you want in there, we call that running it as a platform, and it's basically running the unified code of ASA and FXOS or FTD in a unified image of code. And so that's kind of called a platform. But we also brought the ability to run the ASA as a separate instance and dedicated to that new hardware platform here in the Firepower 1000 2100 series, and run that in what we call appliance mode, which is essentially turning in that box into an ASA dedicated appliance and gives you the full feature functionalities of an ASA in that new platform, with obviously high performance, and then the ability to quickly and easily migrate up to FTD if you have more threat-focused use cases. There are a lot of use cases out there for, especially with remote work from home, remote worker issues going on here with the new COVID pandemic happening, where customers really needed those advanced remote access VPN features. And so having that flexibility to run these newer platforms in appliance mode helps those customers with those remote access VPN use cases. And the other thing is it provides a dedicated management interface or an in-band management interface on the box. So you've got more flexibility in appliance mode, and it abstracts the FXOS behind the ASA CLI, and you've just got more full feature capabilities there in appliance mode with this feature in the 913 version of ASA. And this is supported, I think, just on the 1000, the 2100 series. So we get a lot of questions around, what's the migration path from the old 5500-X? That was the previous hardware models that were out that originally ran either a dual instance or a unified instance of ASA and FTD code. The dual instance, and I think I have a slide coming up on that, was called ASA with Firepower Services, and that only ran on the 5500-X series of platforms. If you want to run unified code with FTD, then the migration path is really over to these new models. You want to get off the old models. Some of these are going end of sale or already have gone into sale. And in general, this is the migration path of the models that you would follow. This will vary depending upon the customer's speed, throughput, capabilities, connectivity, et cetera. But in general, these are the models of the old 5500X series on the left that you'll migrate over to the new models on the Firepower appliance platforms. Here's a little bit of overview on the 2100 series. So I'm not going to read all of this. This is a little unique. When this product came out, and still is the case, we have dedicated CPU and NPU hardware on. I think we've got an architecture slide to show that. This product here also has 4 10 gig interfaces if you need the physical connectivity for it. And when you're running this product with advanced threat defense with FTD code in it, there is no difference in performance when you're running all of the FTD threat protection capabilities versus regular ASA mode. No degradation in performance. Because the hardware acceleration for HTTPS and the IPS functionalities are running in separate CPU instances on this product. So here's the architecture of it. You've got the CPU cores, and then you've got different network processor unit cores that are available there. And this is really what makes this product unique, in that, unlike other platforms, you will see when you add some of the features like AMP, URL protection, things like that, you will see in our performance estimator some drop in performance as you add those features on, turn those features on, those licenses. Not the case here in the 2100 architecture because of this dual CPU and dual NPU. The 4100 series, we came out with new appliance models here. So we had the old 4110, the 4110, the 4120, the 4140s, and now we have the 4112, 15, 25, and 45. So these basically increase performance on average of 50% and higher TLS or HTTPS performance through the boxes. And here's kind of a rundown on each one of those models. So different models have a little bit different performance increase. The 4110 to the 4112 here is roughly 20%. And this is up to 12.5 gigabits. And then here's kind of an overview of the old 10, 20, 40, and 50 models, how they map to the 15, 25, and 45s for upgrade purposes. All this is out there on the spec sheets, on our data sheets. Moving up to the high end, the 9300 platform. Of course, this is our data center firepower model. And this is for highly scalable instances where customers need 10 gig and hundreds of gigabits of throughput, where you start getting into clustering and more advanced use cases and adding in other applications like DDoS protection and so forth. And we have 3 new security modules that came out this year on these. So the SM40, 48, and SM56, they basically added an additional 153 plus a gig and added over 80% or up to 80% of a performance boost in throughput, as well as added more performance on the TLS side. This is a nice reference slide here. It kind of shows you what each of the products support features. PoE isn't typically a feature that is needed in the data center or higher end units. That's more of an SMB use case. So you'll see the PoE support there on the low end 1000 series. The fail to wire, I forgot to mention that on the 20 and the 40, 2140 and the 2150 models, they have a fail to wire interface, which is really used for next gen IPS use cases, not just, not necessarily next gen firewall, but if you want to have a fail to wire capability, that was added to the 2100 series with those new interface modules for the 2140s and the 50s. Clustering, of course, is a big thing on the 4100s and the 9300s. Those are where you're going to be, going into tens and hundreds of gigabits of throughput. And by adding multiple devices on there, turning on clustering is how you scale that out. Refresh. So here's the big thing. We still have a lot of ASA customers that are out there. And while the use cases for remote access, especially with work from home with COVID, is still certainly keeping the ASA and remote access VPN very much alive. And we saw how well that was received by the market and kind of had a resurgence in demand when the COVID pandemic really started to kick in early this spring. A lot of customers have dedicated their platforms out there, even the new firepower platforms, to ASA codes so that they can stay using all of those features with remote access VPN. But there's a lot of customers that are out there that still are running ASA code and aren't using the remote access VPN features and really should be moving over to FTD and getting these advanced threat capabilities. And so that's really what we're trying to get our customers to continue to look at and do. If they have the old 5500X series platforms, as I said, those are going to be going into sale. In some cases, they already are, like the 5506. And so they need to be moving to FTD. That's the future. That's where all of our focus is. That's where our new features and all of our design and efforts are going to. So integration. Cisco Threat Response has been out there for a year and a half or so now. We now have Secure X, which was a huge launch earlier this year. And the Cisco Threat Response is now a module inside of SecureX. It's actually been rebranded and renamed SecureX Threat Response. That integration and the capabilities that we had with FTD and all the firepower code with threat response is still there with SecureX. It looks exactly the same, and you have the ability to launch that from SecureX. Very, very powerful integration there, as well as with StealthWatch Enterprise. And now CDO supports FTD, so you can manage not just ASAs, but you can also manage FTD with the new features in CDO that's part of the integration. I just talked about CTR on the right. We'll cover a little bit more of that. Migration options. We've got a whole section in this deck around migration, but we've got a new version of the migration tool, the Firepower migration tool. CDO allows you to migrate from ASA to FTD quite eloquently. It still supports ASA to ASA upgrades. And we've got some new competitive migrations that are coming up, specifically with Checkpoint. Palo Alto was already in there. So we've made a lot of advances with the migration options for customers with that firewall migration tool. This is a really, really nice reference slide as well. Yeah, it's a little busy, but really what I want to have everyone pay attention to is the Firepower Threat Defense column and the ASA Firewall column, specifically the last 3 rows. So those last 3 rows, in those 2 columns, FTD and ASA Firewall, you'll see the green check boxes. This is what I mean when we're talking about we need to get customers moving over to FTD. The ASA Firewall is not going away. It's out there. It's supported on the Firepower platforms, as I've mentioned, and there will always be use cases for that. But those bottom 3 rows are really where the future is, where we are now, and where the future is going to be as we move forward. Everything above that is pretty much old school. They're old platforms, the old Firepower 7 and 8000 series. Those are the old SourceFire hardware appliance, next-gen IPS appliances. You've got the old 5500s and the 5500-Xs, as I mentioned. None of those platforms support FTD, nor do they support ASA. They don't even support Firepower services or the dual image code that I mentioned on those platforms. So you really have to focus on Firepower Threat Defense, ASA Firewall columns, and the bottom 3 rows as we move forward here as it relates to our Firepower and our overall Cisco Next-Gen Firewall. So let's talk a little bit now about the Firepower software selection, what your options, capabilities are there. I've mentioned a little bit of it up to now. Here we'll start with the ASA. This is our tried and true, best in class. This has been the #1 firewall for many, many years prior to the whole next-gen firewall market. And it still is, very, very mature in its features, robust, stateful firewall inspection, the most advanced VPN capabilities that are out there on the market. And that's why we saw a lot of uptake and a lot of demand when the pandemic hit. Customers needed something that was robust and scalable, that was reliable, and ways for them you could set up clustering with our VPNs and scale out your VPN infrastructure very, very quickly, relatively easily with the ASA code. And that's what got them through this COVID crisis. And they'll probably keep that infrastructure in place for a long, long time because they weren't prepared for it, and a lot of people weren't prepared for it. So those advanced features will be there for a long time, and it's very kind of cool, I thought, how that kind of came back into vogue. It seemed to get lost on the whole migration over the last several years to next-gen firewall. And those are out there in place helping our customers get through and continue to sustain the work from the remote worker. I can't say that right. Work from home initiative that's going on out there. Stateful inspection, classic firewall rules, 5-tuple, allower block, pretty simple, very, very good stuff. You can do automation. You can leverage APIs. You can integrate with the SIEM. We can, forward logs and whatnot to third-party syslog servers and SIEM systems that are out there. And we can interface with APIs so that you can do orchestration with the ASA software. And things there on the right there with the security controls, packet filtering. The deal here is really when you're thinking of the ASA, if you want to go into more IPS and integrated next-gen or firewall features like malware protection and URL filtering and layer 7, that's where you need FTD. Okay, and here is FTD. So in today's world, this is more threat focused. It's got all of these integrated features with IPS and malware. It still does the staple inspection, the 5-tuple rules, but more options as far as what the actions are going to be on those rules. You can do HTTPS, or what's now called TLS decryption. A lot of traffic on the internet being encrypted, as everyone knows. So you can make the firewall like a man in the middle, HTTPS, decrypt that traffic and see malware inside of that. VPN, a lot of remote access VPN features have come over into FTD. So those are some of the things that we've done in the 6.4, 6.5, 6.6 feature. We'll continue to add more capabilities there in the VPN area, NATing and routing. Next-gen firewalls, customers expect them to have IPS integrated. They expect them to have anti-malware and integration with cloud-based sandboxing and layer 7 capabilities. So those are the advanced threat capabilities that Cisco has with FTD and our firepower platforms that are top-notch. If you're wanting to be a threat-focused firewall and have the deepest forensics and capabilities for researching and threat hunting, then FTD is your top choice still out there. I know there's some good firewalls that are out there, but it's my belief, especially when you dig into FMC and you look at these integrated FTD features, we still are best in class. Layer 7 capabilities, deep packet inspection with the Snort engine. That is still the best IPS engine that's out there in the market. And there's advanced capabilities that you get with FMC, with automation. We'll talk about a little bit more, with automated rules recommendations and host discovery, impact flags. There's nobody else out there in the industry that does that and has that integrated with their next-gen firewall. Even standalone next-gen IPS vendors don't support those features. So we get this question all the time. Should I buy an ASA or should I buy an FTD? Which one should I use? And that kind of makes Cisco a little bit more complex, but really it doesn't have to be that complex. You basically, look at the use cases. If you need advanced remote access VPN as a head-end for your firewall, and COVID showed this out, you need things like dynamic access protection or policy with host scan. That's a classic feature that the ASAs had. Clientless VPN with SSL, which is not as much in demand, or client-based SSL. And some of the other features, the load balancing, that's a real big one, and clustering, okay? Or even, multi-context capabilities, then the ASA is going to be your choice, and you're going to probably dedicate that, as we continue on with this work from home pandemic situation, so that you can take advantage and scale and support all those features on VPN. On the other hand, if you're more security focused and you need a threat-based firewall, but you also still need remote access VPN mature functionality, then maybe you'll run an appliance with the ASA code and it's supporting your VPNs, and then have another appliance running FTD. Or maybe there's enough VPN capabilities in FTD, and I have a reference to the feature matrix chart that's later on in this presentation that we'll leave you, that gets you into the details of all of that. But at a high level, you can run remote access VPN, you can run site-to-site VPN now with FTD without sacrificing the advanced threat capabilities that you get with the FTD code and NGIPS and all these other various features. So it really kind of depends, and there may be a combination of the two. But these are, in general, the big rock features that you would want to try to narrow down with your customers. And then putting it all together with how are we going to manage it. I really like this graphic, because this is one of the more complex things about, having a robust, mature portfolio here with firewall, where you have these choices. it can provide a lot of complexity and confusion. This really visually makes it much easier to help make that decision and, what management platform do I need to run each one. So it's pretty simple on the ASA. You have the native on-box manager ASDM that's been around forever, that's still supported out there. And if you have multiple ASAs that you need to do remote management from, the Cisco Security Manager has been that management platform for many, many years. We have not end-of-life that. That's still out there. But we also have the ability for those customers to migrate from CSM over to Cisco Defense Orchestrator. And yes, that definitely is the future and what I would recommend and where customers should go. It's much more scalable. It's much more simple. The ROI is better on it. And customers should start migrating for their multi-ASA instances that are out there, managing those with CDO. CDO, as you see here, with the color of whatever that is, gold, it also can manage all of the firepower, the ASA, the cloud versions, the virtual versions of the various platforms of our firewall. So that's a really, really nice function in CDO. And then when we get over on the left there with Firepower Threat Defense, for the more advanced threat capabilities that customers want, the replacement for the ASDM is FDM. And the Firepower Device Manager replaces ASDM on the new Firepower appliance platforms. And it's that on-box manager mainly for SMB customers, single instance firewalls. They don't have multiple firewalls. Very, very user-driven web interface that steps you through the onboarding and configuration and management of the product. And that can coexist with Cisco Defense Orchestrator. So for customers that want FTD on those platforms and they have, 10, 20, 100, or 1,000 or more firepower platforms out there, then they can scale that up and run that and manage that with CDO. That's a very, very nice option. And then for the security operations focused customers that are out there that really want to go deep into the forensics of the security capabilities that Firepower provides and the forensic and analytics capabilities and features that Firepower Management Center provides, that would be the choice for them. So that will scale up. We've got a slide that shows that. But I like this because this really kind of shows it all on one screen, makes it a little easier to understand. And if you look at our Firepower feature matrix tool, which I'll show, and you start with that, then you can kind of start to scratch your head and get a little confused. This is a great place to start, and then you can double or triple click down on the feature matrix that we'll show a little bit later. Firepower Threat Defense features. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but within a year of the acquisition of SourceFire, which was probably 6 years ago now, it's been quite a while, the first integration that Cisco did with SourceFire was to allow our 5500-X platforms to run the Firepower code, the next-gen IPS code, alongside the ASA stateful firewall code. And we called that, and that was on the 5500-X platforms, we call that a dual image, and that's what's being shown here at the top. So we brought those two things together very, very quickly to market and leveraged the power of both, and they still are supported out there on the 5500Xs. And now you get a threat-centric firewall with advanced next-gen firewall capabilities, AVC, URL, AMP, etc., layer 7 protection, with the Firepower code running alongside the ASA. When you fast forward then, I don't know, a year or so, we started releasing, I believe in the 6.0.1 release of the code base, the unification of those two code bases, the ASA and the Firepower code, into what we now call FTD, or Firepower Threat Defense. So this now unified that, and you must now move that over to, it would run on the 5500X platforms, but from a hardware performance perspective and scaling ability, we start to come out with bigger hardware, bigger, faster, better, with technology, with the Firepower platforms from the 1000 that we just talked about, 2100s, 41s, 9300s, and FTD runs on those. So that provided now a unified manager. In the dual image code at the top, you had to run separate management systems. You had to run either ASDM or CSM to manage the ASA, or you had to run FMC on the right to manage your firepower. So you had two management systems. Now you can have a unified management approach with FTD on the bottom. So that's been kind of a high-level migration. This provides a little bit of overview of the increased visibility that Cisco brings to the market beyond just a typical IPS or typical next-gen firewall with, just threats and what applications and protocols and users are with IPS and next-gen firewall, where when we bring in AMP and we bring in the Snort engine and we bring in FMC with recommended rules and IOCs and impact flags and host discovery, we now can go beyond the typical next-gen firewall and really add that extra layer of visibility and bring a much more detailed view and have that stored in the FMC for our customers and just get a bigger, more holistic view of what's going on in their network, IoT devices that are out there as well. Here we're talking about next-gen IPS, and IPS is really, what's the difference between next-gen IPS and IPS? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment when I get into the FMC features, but the ability to go in and do deep packet inspection and really look at the application layer and unravel those packets and do deep inspection at the application layer, not just layer 3 and layer 4 in the IP header, but look at layer 7 and look into those packets and see what's normal. Do correlation and analysis of that, profile that, do host discovery on it, and then be able to intelligently tell you through the FMC console what signatures need to be turned on or turned off and which ones have the biggest impact based upon the attack type and the operating system that host has on it, and prioritize that for you, and then also integrate that in the back end with Identity Services Engine and leverage the switching, the routing infrastructure, and the wireless infrastructure to block that at the access layer so that a threat will not proliferate. And that's what next-gen IPS and the integration with the Cisco infrastructure can bring for customers. Specifically, a little bit more, I kind of mentioned this, impact flags. What's an impact flag? Well, we have a host discovery. Every packet that comes through a Cisco next-gen firewall and a firepower platform, whether it's virtual or a dedicated appliance, we do a host table buildup. It's a passive profiling. We look at every packet, and we're able to discover and store in our database a profile of what that host is, the IP address, the MAC address, the operating system. Has that operating system, what version is it running on? And then when we start to see attacks, the IPS sees that attack, and if that attack is against a vulnerable system, then we will flag a priority code or an impact level on it. And if that host is vulnerable to that, and very vulnerable, and it's a high-risk attack, and it's targeted towards the operating system that has that vulnerability, we raise that and store that in FMC as an impact flag 1, because that's very relevant. That system is susceptible to that attack, and it could be compromised, and that's worth your attention to know. On the other hand, if that operating system is an attack against, or if that attack is against an operating system that's not even running on your network, you're attacking a host that's running Windows, and the attack is a Linux-based attack, even though it's a high-risk attack, it's not relevant. So it won't be an impact flag 1. It'll actually be like a level 4. And that's something that you don't have to waste your security researchers' time chasing down. And that's an example of saving time and money and your resources through the use of a next-gen IPS versus just a regular IPS. That's a perfect example of a differentiation between what is next-gen IPS versus just a regular IPS, is having that impact flag and that intelligence through host discovery to flag what's only relevant to you and have those security researchers just focus their time and efforts on those impact level ones. The other thing is, along with that profiling that I mentioned, is in that database, we know we build a profile of what the hosts are that are on the system and the operating systems, and then obviously what attacks are running. And so if we don't see hosts that are running Linux because you're a Microsoft shop, then we could basically save your researchers and your configuration security folks that are looking at the rules, because there are people, full-time staff, tuning rules manually to disable rules that really aren't relevant for a business's environment. And so this can happen automatically with FMC, and with our next-gen capabilities in IPS, we know that you're not a Linux shop, you're a Windows shop. So let's turn off 5,000 or however many thousands of rules that aren't relevant for your environment, and let's save resources on the Firepower platform. This can be done automatically. This can run as a regular schedule, and then instead of those IPS researchers spending tens or hundreds of hours of time going through and manually checking that and disabling those rules and tuning those rules, tuning some of them back, turning some of them back on, turning some of them off, just run the Firepower recommended rules through a scheduler, automated, and it will come through and it'll look at this and it'll say, in this case here in the screenshot, we got almost 40,000 rules that we could disable because they're just not relevant. The operating systems that you run there aren't relevant. You don't even have them in your environment. Turn them off. That saves hundreds of hours in costs for your organization. So those two features alone are examples of the differences between a next-gen IPS and a regular IPS, and Cisco alone has those features. We're very, very unique, and I think a lot of people forget that, and I don't want that to be lost on everyone on this session here. Tell your customers about this, because there's so many other things going on in security. We forget when a feature that's been out there for a while, we forget that it has value out there. If other new features and things, we tend to focus on the shiny new thing, and we forget to remind our customers of the value of a feature that's been out there that, frankly, nobody else still supports, and it still has immense value. So I really want you guys to remember that and emphasize it. I think these are phenomenal capabilities. Now, both of those features, I probably should have put this slide before the last one, because both of those features cannot occur, and they will not occur without host profiling or the network discovery capability. And this is done in FMC. And you turn this on, and remember I said every packet that comes through a device or a sensor, i.e. a next-gen firewall, that gets discovered and logged and sent to FMC and stored in the database. And all the applications, the username, the host profile information, MAC address, IP, etc., all that gets stored in a host profile table, and we use that to do intelligent analysis on, to basically perform those features that I just talked about, impact flags, IOCs, and talk about IOCs a lot, but we correlate with indicators of compromise, and the Firepower recommended rules. Impact flags and Firepower recommended rules, top features, cannot happen without network discovery. Phenomenal feature. Here's a screenshot on the right that kind of shows you the drill down of that. Even if users are changing, you have different users using the same machine, we track that as well. So the whole user history will be stored in the host profile here, and then we leverage that in FMC to basically do more detailed analytics on it. Now, another big differentiator still for us, and I know a lot of firewall vendors have anti-malware capability. They have antivirus, they have anti-malware. I get that. We were one of the first in here to really have the advanced malware capabilities that you get sandboxing and integration automatically with Talos in our cloud with the AMP feature when you turn that on in our firewall. The big differentiator here is our retrospective detection. So this has been a feature that's been out for a while, and this is another one we've kind of gotten away from talking. It still is a differentiating feature that only Cisco has. What do we mean by retrospective detection? This means that when we detect a malware infection that's coming through a firewall anywhere out in the network, or if we don't detect it, we are looking at every file that comes through that firewall. And we do a lookup in our AMP cloud that's tied into Talos, and we ask Talos and the AMP cloud, what's the verdict or status of this file? Do you have anything about this file? There's a unique fingerprint of that file called a hash. That's what that file fingerprint metadata is there on the left. And if we have that on file, we can render a decision on that. It's malware. Well, if it's malware, of course, we're going to block it. But if it's not malware, we might say, well, unknown, it doesn't have malware on it. Or if we've never seen it, we'll just say, hey, we don't know about it, it's unknown. We will then upload it automatically and do constant analysis on that, poking that file in our cloud to see if it ever becomes malware. And if it does, even though the initial verdict that we rendered on it was unknown or it's not malware, it's good, and we find out later through that continuous analysis that the file goes bad, we will retrospectively go back and update every AMP engine and every firewall and every other Cisco device that's running AMP across our portfolio, our email products, our web gateway products, our AMP endpoint products. They all get to leverage the value of that inspection of continuous analysis with Talos and that retrospective capability. And it's always being looked at. And as we know in security, things change. A file can change. We think it's good. We reserve the right and actually the transparency. We will say, oh, it was good at one point in time and it went polymorphic and changed 2 hours, 2 weeks, 2 months later. And, we are honest enough to let our customers know that we saw a change in it and we're going to update that so that they're protected when we see that change. There are a lot of sandboxes out there and IPSs and malware engines running in next-gen firewalls that just do a point-in-time inspection and will miss that polymorphic change in their cloud security or whatever their solution is, and they have to go out and manually retouch that file to get an update of it. This happens automatically with Cisco. This is the unique value add that we have still that no one else has. And there's other features here with trajectory, which is a nice visibility screen to show the history of when that file came in, what user had it, a day zero patient, it's kind of what we call that, and how that file propagated and was transferred to other endpoints across your infrastructure. Because if you can't see it and you don't have the scope of it, then you won't really know how to remediate that. So we provide you that visibility through our file trajectory view. A lot of other threat hunting capabilities here. I could probably talk for an hour just on that slide alone. And this is kind of an example here. This is showing the endpoint correlation on the right with the AMP for endpoints. On the FMC console, it's a similar type thing where it shows you the connection of every IP address and how that file connected to another endpoint and propagated that, and what application was used to transfer that. But this really is, we used to call this AMP everywhere. This is saying AMP in action. Advanced malware protection is an ecosystem. It's a feature, a license that you can turn on across the portfolio in addition to the next-gen firewall to find out all of these contexts, who, what, where, when, how did it come in, and get that correlation. And what you see on the right there, that yellow bar, is what we call an IOC, or an indicator of compromise. We don't use just one piece of information to say, oh, this is, you're guilty. This shows that this is malware. We look at behavior as well as signatures, and we will correlate those together to say these 2, 3, or 4, or 5 things together indicate that this host is infected. And you need to look at this and maybe block it or do more research and find out about that. That's what an IOC is, an indication of compromise, and we'll visually show you that in the product here. Very, very powerful. Now, of course, we have policies in the firewall to block these things, and we can block beyond just layer 3 and layer 4, like a classic stateful firewall inspection. We can block at the URL or a fully qualified domain name, or even all the way up the OSI stack up to layer 7 applications. Using our policies in Firepower Threat Defense, We can even, because we're becoming and are now a more open platform, you can use our signatures for layer 7 application, but you can also leverage the open ones that are out there through the open exchange of a standard called Open App ID. So third-party organizations and folks can basically create their own custom layer 7 applications, IDs, and post those to the Open App ID, and we can integrate that and use both. So again, staying up to date, getting feeds to enhance the detection capabilities, not just with Talos, but other third-party organizations as well, to then invoke a policy as we see traffic come in that gets triggered by one of those feeds. Love this feature. This is something I've been waiting for quite a while, and in the 6.5 release earlier this year, we actually flipped over to a new URL database in Firepower Threat Defense, and it's basically running the Talos-based URL categories. We had a third-party engine that we were using for many, many years, and we actually are still kind of leveraging both of them alongside of one another while we migrate over to the newer ones. So you have the legacy ones that are 6.5 that are still supported with the new native ones, and that's available to you. And you can also submit any disputes that you have with the URL categories, because those are always changing and whatnot. And you can do that right within the FMC UI, dispute URL categories, the drop down there when you actually click on the URL category in the interface of the product. So really, really nice capability and feature that we have there. I mentioned in-band, man-in-the-middle TLS decryption. So if you want advanced threat detection for flows that are being encrypted, we have the capability of doing that. And you've got all your enforcement decisions and capabilities right there in the platform through whatever management means that you want in the portfolio. VPN, we talked about this. This is kind of a high-level slide, but both site-to-site and remote access VPN capabilities in ASA and FTD. I'll show you the matrix here in a little bit that kind of shows you the different drill-down features specific to FTD and ASA, and then what management platforms support each of those features on what platform. Very important to have that. Now, getting into design of next-gen firewall and the modes of operation, the two most classic high-level modes of operation of a firewall were routed mode and transparent mode. So transparent basically makes the firewall very simple. One interface for the inside, one interface for the outside, and the firewall is basically a transparent bridge. It's a switch functioning at layer 2. That's a very, very common and easy deployment that's out there a lot. Sorry, that slide wasn't supposed to advance. And then, there are cases where you need to do routing and have different domains and whatnot. Then the other feature called IRB, Integrated Routing and Bridging, that's supported as well. And that really combines the best of both of those modes, where maybe you want to run transparent and routed mode and have switch ports grouped together and then route between those. That's what IRB will help you out with, and is a nice new feature and function that's in there. Many people are familiar with multi-context mode in the ASA, which is basically running a virtual firewall and multiple virtual firewalls on a single ASA platform. Great feature, still out there on the ASA code, still supported. And then as we move into FTD code and then the transition to cloud-based computing, this thing called containers and containerization and running applications and processes in their own instances, irrespective of another instance, and being able to restart that and scale that out has come into play in the firewall market space. And that's what we've done here with multi-instance. Now, this is supported in just the 4100s and the 9300 series platforms, and it basically allows you the ability to instantiate or deploy kind of like a virtual firewall, but a containerized version of a firewall, and make it a logical device on a single processing module or physical appliance, and the single modules within that appliance, and run those independent of one another. Very similar to like running, Docker as a container in a cloud-based computing model like Azure or Google Cloud. or AWS. That's basically what we're doing and packaging that up in a feature called multi-instance on the Firepower 4100s and 9300 series. You can see here the separation that we get with logical interfaces and VLANs. That's all done with a single supervisory card in the product. And you have the ability to run multiple instances of FTD today, and then coming soon, if you want to run FTD alongside ASA and have one module running ASA only code and then have another module running FTD code, you'll be able to do that in the future. Today, on these platforms, you can only run multiple ASAs or multiple FTD instances on that single piece of hardware platform. And here's the rundown of multi-instance. So if you're familiar with multi-context, you know, the various platforms that are out there, as you go up in bigger platforms, you can run, you know, tens or hundreds of contexts. So make sure you understand what the customer's use case is and what platform we're talking here, because the multi-instance, we're not talking about hundreds of instances here like we had with multi-context. So these are the number of instances in FTD that you can run within each hardware platform, and they can support, you know, high availability mode on these. So this basically, when you run these instances, you can basically do an independent reboot of any instance and not have that affect another virtual firewall. Another thing that came in, and this was the use case with multi-context and the need as you're running virtual firewalls on the same platform, you're inevitably going to have overlapping IP addresses out there in the private address range specifically. That was a real problem. You know, that breaks routing and, you know, causes all kinds of problems. Well, we have the VRF feature, virtual routing and forwarding. This allows you to collapse those and basically still support segmentation and use cases where you can combine environments that have overlapping IP addresses, and through the use of virtual routing and forwarding, still be able to group those and have different zones and route between those zones. This is combined with FTD multi-instance capability, so you get a lot of scalability and a lot of support for customers where if they have an acquisition or just consolidation going on. Very, very nice feature to have, demand growing on it. And this is just a good list of reference here for what the VRF count is supported on each Firepower platform model. So in this view right here, we talk about, you know, all of the products that Cisco has across our security portfolio. And I talked earlier about, you know, how firewalls aren't going away. This kind of seems like firewall is the center of the universe when you look at this visual. And in some cases, it really is and always will be, because a customer will always have a firewall in their network. And so they're also going to have these other things. They need gateway security for email. They need cloud-based security. They need you know, network infrastructure and policy-based security, authentication, et cetera. Our firewall with these platforms integrates across our portfolio. Multi-factor authentication, integration with ICE. So the firewall, when it sees an advanced threat, it can notify ICE, and ICE can then leverage the wired and wireless infrastructure to isolate and contain an endpoint that has malware, so it won't proliferate across the organization and infect further. Correlating across the endpoint infrastructure, integrating with the sandbox architecture with Threat Grid, integrating with web security controls, our cloud-based security, on and on and on. You know, this is very, very powerful integration with the firewall at the foundation. And it's very, very unique to Cisco because, I mean, there's some good firewall vendors that are out there. We all know who they are, but they do not have the breadth and integration and the security intelligence with Talos that Cisco has. And there's a lot of customers out there that are continuing to see a lot of challenges with managing their security infrastructure because they have a lot of vendors And as time goes forward, they seem to have less and less resources and less expertise. And so the more they have an integrated portfolio and less vendors, the better off they are. And that's really what Cisco's mission is here, is to try to bring what we do really, really well to bear for a customer and integrate this fully so that they can complete some of their consolidation efforts and goals and minimize the time that it takes to do this detection and make it easier for all of their administrators to see what's going on from a security perspective and basically save a lot of time and do more things with automation and orchestration. And that's kind of where the future is going here with DevOps and SecDevOps and APIs and whatnot, orchestrating what's happening out there through all this telemetry, getting all that information, having that threat intelligence through an integrated architecture, and then having the ability to go in and simply ask a system a question. Is this IP address or this threat, this file hash or this domain that I see in this article out there on the web, is this running in my network? Am I vulnerable to it? You do not have to be a security researcher or have deep knowledge in any of this to be able to answer those questions. And that's done through a simple cloud-based tool that actually is free that we provide for our customers that reaches across that entire integrated security portfolio to ask those questions of the products, called Cisco Threat Response. It's now being called SecureX Threat Response. So this slide's a little bit dated because we just went through a little renaming with the big launch of SecureX. But nonetheless, the product still works exactly the same, and it basically achieves that automation and turns a non-security researcher into a very, very impactful and useful role in the organization that you can provide. And by just opening this up and asking it, what have you seen this domain? Malware.com. Is malware.com running anywhere in my organization? Threat Response will go out through an API and touch all of the products and render that data. It'll enrich it and help you visualize it and put it onto what we call a relations graph and paint out the endpoints. We paint the targets or endpoints in purple, and then files and URLs and things like that that represent objects in your organization that could be infected or could be bad, where observables, I guess, is really what we call those. But if they're bad, they're turned red. And if that file is a bad file and it's existing in my network, it'll be attached to a purple target or a host. And you visualize that and see that very, very quickly and easily. And then you can pivot on it and just basically right-click, and you could block it right from there. You don't even have to log into the device that's doing the enforcement, whether it's email or firewall or what have you. You've got the ability through one simple click to pivot right into that and block that right there without even logging into the console of the supported device that's doing the enforcement. Very, very powerful. This is the way things are moving, the way things are going with SecDevOps. And Cisco started this several years ago with our DevNet program. And we have fully programmable interfaces in our Firepower series with the FMC, FTD. You can write APIs and you can basically automate and orchestrate functions through scripting, you leveraging our DevNet infrastructure out there right with the Firepower products. The link is down there below for more information on that, but wanted to draw your attention to that. Why? Because automation and orchestration is the future, and it helps speed the time to detect and resolve things in a customer's environment. We do this through a very, very rich and, frankly, a massive ecosystem. We used to call this the security ecosystem. It's now called Security Technical Alliance, CSTA. This slide should probably be updated. We have over 170 partners that are included in this, with, I think, upwards of 300 or more certified product integrations. I was going to click on some of these. I don't know how much time we have remaining here. I don't want to get too down the path, but if you click on any of these active links that are in the slide deck, it'll take you right to what we're talking about on the slide. So here's the Security Technical Alliance, and you can drill down and you can click on any one of these partners, and you can see in the lower left which products, in this case, the TiVo Networks is integrated with, and say, okay. And if you want to click on one of those or go to Marketplace, you'll get more details around that and what the capabilities that a TiVo is doing in the Cisco Security Technical Alliance to leverage ICE and PX Grid to do that integration and bring more power for your customer. Okay, so, yeah.
Just a quick time check. We're about 10 minutes past the halfway point, so you have about 50 minutes left.
All right. Now, let me go back here. I probably shouldn't have clicked on that.
I'll tap back.
1 second. I hit back, but it didn't go there. Let me go back, share again. Should have tested that a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so that's the Security Technical Alliance. Let's talk about management. This is one of, as I said earlier, my favorite topics. This can be very, very confusing, but it doesn't have to be. We've got basically FMC, which I've talked about. Its capabilities, very rich, very deep. You get down into the two big use cases here. Which management should I buy? Which one do I need? Well, it really gets into, is it a security operations use case? Do you have a customer that really needs deep forensics? Those capabilities that I talked about with FMC, host discovery, impact flags, automated rule tuning, that's FMC, okay? If you don't need those, or you have a customer that doesn't need them, or even have someone on staff that has that function or role, and they really want to do more configuration management, policy orchestration, and they're more of a network operations orientation, then CDO is your best bet, or potentially using FDM as just a single instance. So it really kind of comes down to that. You can coexist FDM with CDO. You cannot coexist CDO with FMC. And that's really has to kind of get down to those two use cases. FDM. This is the on-box manager that replaces ASDM, as I said before. Doesn't show all the features and functions on it, but this is a very easy, wizard-driven interface, web-based, wizard-driven interface that steps you through very simply configuring the box's interfaces, VLANs, DHCP, routing, NAT, etc., making it very, very easy. Almost like what you would buy at a big box store, okay? Click on the items that are there. It steps you through that left to right, and very, very simple, very easy to do. You don't have to be a security person to know how to do that. As I said, wizard-based, etc. This actually leverages the API built into it, and CDO leverages that API as well. That's why this can coexist with CDO. And it will manage, CDO will manage an FTD device that is running FDM locally on the box. So, as I said, a lot of things are moving over to APIs. You have here some of these choices. With FDM and CDO, then you would leverage the API that comes with FTD, and you can run FDM or you can run a CDO to manage that device. If you have multiple devices, obviously you'd use CDO. If you want to have external orchestration tools, do scripting. SecureX is an example of that. Leveraging the API and FTD to automate and orchestrate repeatable actions, automated actions. You can do that through third-party tools. AlgoSec is one. Actually, that's in our price list now. Tufin. SecureX is one that's in there that does that. Or you can also automate directly into FMC, and then FMC can then instantiate some of those automation scripts directly to the devices themselves. Some main characteristics here. Multi-device manager. So FMC on-premise, obviously that, we do have virtual options for that. I think I have a slide to show that. But you can run this FMC on a physical appliance or a virtual appliance. You'll see the models here in a little bit. All these features I've been talking about: network discovery, impact flag, PX grid integration. The rapid threat containment feature uses PX grid API on FMC to do that automation with ICE and have ICE do the isolation and then containment at the network layer for access where we see an infection. We're using the wired or wireless infrastructure. Now, CDO on the right doesn't do any of that stuff. So CDO is basically for getting a scalable and consistent policy enforcement across multiple different platforms. So ASA, FTD, Meraki, all those are supported in CDO. One policy can get pushed to all of those devices. Very, very nice, very simple, very easy, and it's scalable. And it's got a very low total cost of ownership, and you do not need a complex security researcher to do that. And that's kind of where the use case is around CDO. FMC, I think I've talked a lot about these features already, so I'm going to skip over this, but this doesn't even contain all the features that are in FMC. But I've hit a lot of these already. And this is where if your customer needs deep research and control and management over the device, but really wants to get into the forensics of it and needs all those features, they got to have FMC. Unparalleled. You can run FMC virtual now. So these are the models that are out there. The 2, 10, and 25 have been out there for a while. We've got new appliances that I have a slide for. And now we've released in 6.5 the FMC V300, which scales that up to much higher number of devices, 300 devices in the virtual versions of this. And this kind of shows the migration path from the old FMC platforms to the new ones. The hardware is pretty much, it's just a new UCS server that changed the model numbers of the FMC appliances. There were no performance or spec gains or differences between these two FMC models across the portfolio. Here are the specs for the Virtual 300. There is an upgrade PID to go from the 25 virtual FMC version to the 300, but warning or just reminder, you cannot upgrade from a 2 to a 10 or a 10 to 25. When you buy those, you own them. If you need to go beyond 10 devices and you bought a 10 device FMC virtual, then you're basically going to be buying a 25 one, right? So we get that question a lot, and there is not going to be an upgrade PID for those lower versions ones. So I just recommend that you upsell and buy the 25 at a minimum if you're going to start out virtual or go higher. APIs, another big advantage here is integrating with third-party security systems for security operations centers. Obviously FMC leverages the REST API, and other third-party integrations can leverage that. So the Radware modules, the DDoS module, the VDI module, all of those get integrated through the API, the REST API, and into FMC. I talked about Cisco threat response or SecureX threat response. This is just showing a picture of that with the relations graph and the observables and whatnot. I think we have another reference slide in here for some of the standards-based threat intel feeds that you can integrate with. The feature of Threat Intelligence Director, taking in standard feeds like Stix and Taxi to get third-party feeds into FMC. Very, very powerful stuff. The other thing that's very powerful that people forget about as well with FMC is the correlation capabilities, the correlation engine that's in there. There's a lot of use cases, and a lot of people don't use this, but the rapid threat containment feature that we took to market and kind of bundled that's leveraging custom correlation policy engine in FMC to basically utilize that feature. But another use case is where maybe you want to do not rule reduction, but event reduction. Take hundreds or thousands or even hundreds of thousands of events and through a custom correlation rule, create a policy that basically filters those down to only 2, 3, or 4 actionable events that you want to see and act on. Because there's going to be a lot of noise with turning on event logging with integrated firewall connections and IPS rules and IPS connections. That can create a lot of noise. Correlation policies can help automate that and reduce that noise for you. Intrusion policies, intrusion integration. Intrusion events can be integrated with StealthWatch. So that's another example. I mentioned rapid threat containment. This is basically leveraging the custom correlation engine, where if we see through the AMP engine or URL or file analysis or any of the threat detection capabilities, the policy rule, layer 7 rule, if we see that trigger off on the firewall, we can then, through an API, through the PXCreate API, notify ICE, and ICE can then say, okay, that's the IP address of the user. Here's where that user is connected. Here's what the port is on the switch or the wireless infrastructure. And then we can block that and quarantine that so that it will not proliferate across the rest of the organization. Very, very powerful capability there with advanced threat protection, with rapid threat protection using the correlation rules. The Threat Intelligence Director, I forget what version of FTD this was released. I want to say 6.4 or 6.5, probably 6.5. This now, with the introduction of Threat Intelligence Director, turns on the capability to bring in feeds from common threat sources through a common interface like Structured Interface Exchange, STIX, and Taxi, and other vendors out there, and bring other threat telemetry in besides just Talos to make the FMC and your Cisco next-gen firewall investment even more powerful, and then act upon those threat feeds in addition to what we have, which is already world-class, based on what those feeds are bringing in. Very, very powerful capabilities. And then this is really, really useful, a contextual cross-launch inside of FMC, where if you right-click, it presents a pop-up window that, in this case, will show you the integration with Talos, and you can pivot over and open up another window into that particular incident or IP address or observable that you're looking at, and see the information that Talos has in an article and the geolocation of it, and pivot directly to that so you can get more information and read about that. Or go to a third-party source, go to VirusTotal or go to AlienVault. Whatever you've integrated on that, we've got the cross-launch capability integrated there with FMC, which is really, really time-saving for a lot of organizations. We've talked about Cisco Defense Orchestrator. It's our cloud-based network security management, mainly for the firewall, but there are other platforms. Meraki, MX is supported on that. ASA is supported. The WSA is supported. And this is really, really a scalable way to have unified policy pushed out across different platforms. That's mainly the big advantage here. No hardware appliance on site, no management of that, no updating software, no hardware going out of date. You see this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nines? No, 5 nines. 5 nines capability of backup here. Nice high availability backup, co-location in data centers, scalable. This is a great solution, and we continue to invest in this and add more features and more platforms. So CDO, here's the platform layout of this. You can see this in our specs. I won't go through all of the details here, but pretty much covers all of the firewall lines. And we now have Meraki in this, and we now are supporting virtual products, both private and public cloud virtual instances of FTD, and some of our routers. We also added in a cloud-based logging service called SAL, Cisco Security Analytics and Logging. We all know, if you don't know, it's no great secret, that FMC cannot scale to the level of the events because of the rich telemetry that it's getting, the security data, the deep forensics that it's doing. It can only handle so many events, connection events, stored locally on the appliance. and then it becomes necessary to offload those events onto something like a SIM or maybe something in the cloud. And that really was the use case for SAL. And that also allows your FMC to scale, and it also allows you to have more historical retention for compliance use cases out there in security. So how does that work? At a high level, your on-premise sensor, your FTD sensor, sends its logs through a syslog message directly to the Cisco Security Analytics Cloud. That goes over to the storage in the background, and actually StealthWatch Cloud is our infrastructure that we're leveraging there, that is also using CDO as the UI to actually view those logs. Now, you don't need extra licenses for CDO or StealthWatch Cloud. This just happens in the background. You do need a SAL license. I've got a reference slide for that. But through a Cisco Security Connector directly on, I think in 6.6 FTD, that's native now on the appliance, that FTD device will send its log directly into the SAL cloud, and then through a CDO login instance, you can view those logs and basically go back as long as you want to see those logs, and based on the license feature that you have to buy a license for the amount of log storage. And I think I've got a reference on that. But these are the tiers here that SAL supports. There's basically 3 tiers: logging and troubleshooting. So if you just want to send your logs up and offload those and get those stored through compliance reasons, you can view those in CDO. All you need is a simple logging and troubleshooting Cisco Security Analytics logging license, the LNT license. If you want to do more deeper analytics on that, then the StealthWatch Cloud portal that we provide access to brings flow data and telemetry from StealthWatch Cloud into the picture here, and it will take that FTD data that's being sent from the sensor, and it will do analytics on it. So you'll see more behavior-based type instances on that rather than just an intrusion event, a simple logging event. And then total network analytics is basically bringing endpoint licenses to take that flow telemetry on your native network, put that into StealthWatch Cloud, and combine that with the firewall logs and the analytics we're doing on that, along with all the logging and troubleshooting logs, and bring that all together into a total behavior-based analytics solution, all in one interface. This is a little bit of an eyesore here, but the bottom line is on the bottom here in orange or gold or whatever that color is, on the left is the logging and troubleshooting license, and what you get as the logging service as you go up there with red, and then the firewall analytics and detections, the logging service comes with that in addition to the analytics. And then as you go to the right, the total network analytics takes on that local native flow collector that can be integrated in with StealthWatch Cloud, and it does that private network monitoring through taking flow logs off of the network in addition to the firewall logs and combining that, so we get behavioral analytics on both of those things for you. This is just a little bit more about it. I probably said most, if not all of this, so I'm going to move on. Here we're kind of bringing everything together on the management story. I mentioned this, CDO and FDM are co-managers. The real takeaway here is just, the columns of which platform, just another way of looking at this. Next-gen firewall with FTD is supported across all of these management platforms, FDM, CDO, and FMC. It really gets down to, are you a NetOps or a SecOps use case user, and which features do you need to have control and deeper inspection of? CDO does not get you those granular IPS policies. It doesn't get you the malware policies. That is something that we're looking at on the roadmap, but for right now, that's not supported. And it does not support those deep forensics and features that you get in FMC with the network host discovery and the automated rule tuning and the impact flag analysis that I mentioned earlier. Obviously, clustering, multi-instance, those are not supported. So for larger environments, enterprise environments, and very deep security focused administrators, those are the features that they are going to need FMC for. And then this is the one for the ASA. So again, moving from CSM over to CDO, CDO is the future. So that's the message there. I won't read all of this. This is a high level of just basically a regurgitation of this manager of choice thing and kind of the use cases as far as, edge, enterprise branch, internet edge, SMB, running to the data center and campuses. It's pretty obvious what you need here when you look at each one. The other slides said that, but this is just even higher level. Okay, catching my breath. Firepower, threat defense, sizing and licensing. We got a lot of good reference material in here. So let's get through into this. This is starting with FTD. What comes with FTD when you first deploy it is a 90-day free evaluation license of all of the features. And when you log into it, here's what you're going to see. This is right from the FMC console. You go into eval mode, you accept this, you get a free 90-day license. That by default, I believe, okay, so it says here, do you have to register with smart licensing? But if you say no to this, you can use the classic licensing, which uses the product activation key. So you do not, this screenshot here is kind of showing welcome to using smart licensing, but I believe you still have the ability to use the product activation key or the classic licensing. It's up to you which one you want to use. If you're going to use smart licensing, you need a smart account to do that. So if you're wanting to evaluate FTD and using FMC here, make sure that you know that your customer has a smart account. If they do, then they'll be able to leverage these features that are on the right. If not, then you'll basically say no and just do classic licensing, and you'll have to get a manual registration key emailed to them, and you'll have to unlock that key and apply that in FMC. On the other hand, if they're a smart account, the advantages there, much more scalability, it's easier, it automatically registers, there's no product activation key, it shows up in their smart account and they just apply it to the device and life is good and easy. These are the licenses that we have in FTD. There's a base license. Whether it's dual image or a unified image, doesn't matter. You have a threat, a malware, and a URL filtering license, all available in a subscription term of 1, 3, or 5 years. The base license is a perpetual license that comes with the product when you buy it. And you do get, I think that's shown in here somewhere. Well, I'll get to it. I believe you get, obviously you get firewalling, you get the base AVC code, and you get the base snort code, but you do not get updates with that. You will have to buy a threat and a malware license in order to get updates to the AVC engine and the snort IPS engine. So do not buy this product without one of those licenses and getting SmartNet support to get the updates on it. Network security. So this is a really, really great reference here. I was going to show this, but for time purposes, I'll probably not open this. This is the ordering guide. The link's on there. All the information about the NetSec and the firewall lines, the features, the licensing and all that, all the SKUs that are in there. I think this is pretty well known out in the partner community. Great reference. The Firepower Performance Estimator. I bet there's a number of folks that haven't gone out and utilized this. There's been a lot of updates to this. Highly recommend you do that. When you click this link here, it'll take you out to a video. It's a short video that kind of shows you a demo of using it. And it also kind of explains some of the features and capabilities of it. But basically, it goes to this portal, and on the top left, there's a slider bar there for bandwidth. You can either type in your bandwidth or slide that bar from left to right to the bandwidth that you need. Typically would be, your internet link or maybe whatever the bandwidth is on your internal link. And when you click that and just hit apply, it automatically populates the screen with the supported firepower models that will support the throughput needed for that bandwidth. On the bottom left, you can then scroll down. If you want to click off different features of the licenses or feature engines that you're going to turn on in the platform and see what impact that has on the bandwidth and the throughput, then have at it. It's a really, really great way to see which model is needed for the features that you're going to be running on those subscription licenses. And then you can play with other things like the packet size and utilization and whatnot. It's got a lot of capabilities in it. And in that video and the demo, they actually show this table right here. And it shows you which of those features that you click off and choose are going to have the most impact on throughput. They're summarized on here. I won't read them. Great reference slide. And the video that John Sortsakakis from the BU has on that URL link on the previous slide is a really, really great tool. Some other things for sizing estimation, some best practices that are out there that John talks about on that video. Packet size, connection rates, things like that. Those are taken into account. What features are going to be enabled in the future? You need to anticipate that. Ask your customer. Maybe they don't want it now, and they want to try to, buy a smaller box. But if they're going to be adding those features in the future, or they haven't anticipated what the growth is going to be in user count, bandwidth count, that needs to be added into this. And maybe it's better to buy a bigger box to handle that and not have to go back and address that if they run out of horsepower and performance. So all of these are in the performance estimator. They're all in that video. You can kind of see what the best practices are. John goes through that. We've got them here as a reference as well. Okay, so that's the kind of the platform performance estimator aspect. But what about FMC? This is a big one here. For a long time, we really haven't had good tools and guidance on this. We've added a lot of good practices now for how to go through an exercise and best practices in estimating what model of FMC you're going to need based upon the amount of events that are going on and storage retention that a customer needs. So these are best practices for that. And these are good reference slides so that you know what, in general, is needed from a memory and a storage disk capability, and what the maximum event per second rate is for each of the models of the FMC appliances that are out there. And these are on the data sheets as well. So this is basically just a data sheet on a PowerPoint slide. Same thing here. This is all out on the data sheets. Reference slide. Not really going to speak a ton about that because I'm going to lead into more detail on that in these subsequent slides here. So there's a lot of events that our firewall captures. It's a next-gen firewall. So we're capturing classic layer 3, layer 4, 5-tuple NAT routing information in syslog messages in FTD, stateful information about high availability status of high availability firewalls, and then in FMC, there is even a deeper level of information that's being captured there. Connection logs, health logs, all the IPS impact flags, the malware incidents, all of the discovery events, those can all be logged. In addition, the most scalable way to get that information stored for compliance reasons or purposes and for historical retention capabilities, in addition to a compliance regulation that has to be met, is to offload those via the eStreamer app that is supported on FMC. If you want longer retention of events, go back in time and look at those, you would use the eStreamer application, and you can see all of the information that's on the left under the FMC syslog, FTD syslog, but in addition, using eStreamer, extra information that is exported through the eStreamer app in a continuous stream to an external storage retention solution like a SIM that then has a NAS or whatever connected to it that can scale for you. That's really what you need to be looking at and considering here. Now, as it relates to the FMC, and if you don't have a SIM or not looking and don't have a use case for compliance and long-term storage retention, naturally everybody wants to use the FMC to get as much storage, history retention, and also be able to scale in the bandwidth when you're updating software, updating code. The VRT team in Talos is updating the signatures and whatnot. How much bandwidth and all those things does that take? That happens on the management channel side when you're pushing configurations and updates and re-imaging devices. But then there is the events that are happening on the live data, the connection, the IPS events. Those are all being logged and sent up to FMC. So, you know, it's no great secret the FMC is going to run out of capacity at some point in these two areas here. Also, the response time can be affected in the UI on the FMC when you're connecting to it. It can take longer to connect to it and push configuration changes. So there's a lot of performance considerations that need to be understood, and we have a best practices guide that now helps take you through that to optimize this. In the past, that was not the case, and so there was a lot of frustration around FMC, and the expectations, I think, for FMC were quite too high, really. We were treating FMC like a SIM. FMC is a forensic analysis tool, first and foremost, that also does configuration management and policy management, but it really was a threat investigation tool, first and foremost. And it got turned into what, in people's minds, is supposed to be that, plus long-term log retention, a SIM, as well as configuration management and deep security inspection, and that's just too much. It cannot do all of those things. It can do them in a short period of time, but not for long-term storage retention. So when you're looking at this, FTD is sending all that information up to FMC, and you have all these things on the right that were expected of FMC to handle and do it in a long-term capacity perspective. And so you have a lot of FTD devices sending all of this to FMC, and you might only get a week's worth of retention, and customers are expecting at least 2 weeks or maybe a few months or more. And that's where offloading the eStreamer to a SIM using the client interface, the eStreamer client on the SIM itself, it can offload these and basically store those for longer term. And that is the best practice. However, the problem is that the connection events are still coming up to FMC, and that still creates a performance issue for FMC. So in the newer versions of FTD, we're now giving you the option to leverage the syslog service on the FTD sensor itself and offload that from the FMC and send that to the SIM. So now FMC is not having to store those connection events. It's really been a huge performance advantage for the FMC to be able to utilize this. So this has now become a best practice. And then as we look at this, FMC can still take third-party feeds through Threat Intelligence Director and still do the orchestration capabilities and take on some of that extra functionality that you need FMC to do and not be burdened by those connection events anymore. It's just showing all the various ways that third-party systems and event systems can share information and offload that with an event connector in the case of eventing and syslog servers with FTD. The devices themselves now can send their events directly to that external syslog server or cloud-based storage solution or a SIM. Or if you want, you can still store some of that on FMC, but the best practice is to offload that to a SIM. Automating and orchestrating some of this through the API. Obviously, we do that today with CDO, but third-party information management systems can do that and basically then orchestrate that directly to the device. These are great links. Highly recommend when you get these slides, you click on these. They have really, really nice short videos that take you through the sizing of the firewall itself. They take you through the sizing of the FMC, and then the guidelines on FMC for managing the devices, the bandwidth guide. Divya and Air does a phenomenal job of showing that information on there. I'm not going to click on those and run those right now, but those are really, really great reference tools.
There's a few questions regarding the migration tool and the formulas. Those previous 3 links include the formulas on how to determine sizing. They explain the formulas, and it's a really good in-depth guide. Highly recommend checking it out.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first saw the best practices guide and from Divya and those calculations were out there, I'm like, man, I'm not a math major. Help me out with this. She has that in those videos, and it steps you through it. So a lot of progress has been made to make that easier to do sizing for those platforms.
Right. And a quick time check, we're at 15 minutes until our next break.
Okay, perfect. I think I can make it. Migrating. So big effort sometimes. It's made a lot easier with our firepower management tool and with CDO. So that's not as big of an uplift for customers as it used to be. Here's the paths kind of. From ASA to FTD, you can go ASA to ASA and then to FTD. So whatever the timeline is, if a customer has an existing ASA series, frankly, the best and easiest way to do that is if they have classic ASAs, 5500 series, it's very quick and easy for them to manage to bring those under the management of CDO and then migrate that over to firepower platforms as they replace those old 5500s and 5500Xs to firepower series appliances. They can then run ASA code on those firepower appliances and then update them through CDO to FTD. High-level overview, I know, but very simplistic explanation, but it is pretty simple and easy to do. Here's another table that's showing that, ASA to ASA. The level of effort there is very easy. When you go from ASA to FTD, things get a little bit more complex, and you're probably going to leverage the migration tool and combination that with our migration help desk services that we have out there. We had this earlier on the platform, so this is kind of just in general a high-level guide of the hardware on the old Dash X platforms to the new firepower platforms on the models. Here we're going over the migration tool itself. So there's a lot of capability on this. I think we're on 2.1 or 2.2 version right now, just came out. You can look at, before you actually deploy this, those reporting capabilities, pull in the configurations from your ASA, look at that before you migrate it over to a new ASA or FTD, and then automate this. Mapping this over to ACLs, the NATs, the objects are now supported, FQDNs, interfaces, multi-context to multi-instance, all these things are supported, and we can scale this out a lot better now with the Firepower Migration tool. This is a visualization that kind of shows that, how you take your ASA configuration, you would install Firepower Migration tool on a platform. I think we have a reference for that, and then connect it to your version, your instance of FMC. I would recommend maybe having a separate FMC as a test tool to pull this in through the API before you actually deploy that to your devices. And then you also could pull this into CDO. CDO then creates templates, and the CDO will push those out from the cloud to the devices themselves. Here's an overview of the tool options and the differences between FMT and the FMT in CDO. Not going to go through this in detail, but this is a good reference slide to show you what versions are supported, and the fact that you do need either a Windows 10 or a Mac desktop to deploy or install the FMT tool on there as a way to actually migrate those and pull the configs in from the devices themselves before they're pushed out to FMC or CDO. And here's the tool release itself, version 2.1, which does now support PAN over to FTD. We did not support Palo Alto prior to this, I don't believe. We are looking to bring in who's the Fortinet. Is another third-party vendor out there that's going to be supported in version 2.2, I believe, or 2.3. That's coming out this fall. We also support checkpoint migration. So you can use this Cisco to Cisco or take a competitive migration now. And there are customers out there that aren't satisfied or happy with those other solutions out there and use FMT to migrate them over. Best practices on how to do this, some of the top ones that are here, reviewing the migration list, create a separate user account for FMC. Do not do this on your production FMC and push this out. You want to have a separate FMC and create another user account for that to review that. Review them, go through the reports, maybe do the deploy in a test dev environment, not on production, before you then roll that out. A link here on how you get the migration tool and install that. There's a demo to watch that. Easy to do that. I mentioned at the outset we were going to talk about roadmap. This is kind of where we've been, not where we're going. Just reminding you of some of the updates that we've had in the 6.5 and the 6.6 release of late. An upgraded UI, the new RAVPN features, object features now, object rules that are supported in FMC that have been a long time coming. And then some of the usability with the new UI, being able to look at time-based policies, looking at the rules themselves in the policy engine and being able to do searches and highlighting those searches of what rule is seen and being able to quickly highlight that and see what rule is being used in a particular search that you want to have, whether it's IP, FQDN, et cetera. Some of the accomplishments, again, I mentioned the new UI. We talked about the new hardware. Now FTD is supported in CDL. Really, really cool thing. The integration with CTR is there. Now CTR is called Cisco SecureX threat response. So keep in mind that name change. We added TrustSec tag in support into the firewall, and then multi-instance. These were all big changes that have happened in the 6.4 through the 6.6 release chains here. So this is a big investment that Cisco's making in the firewall. We continue to make that. We're trying to make the product easier to use. We're trying to make it scalable, unify the policy and the visibility. We'll continue to do more of that in CDO and supporting FTD. Deployment, scaling that out with the virtual 300, the tools, firewall migration. We've had a new lifecycle policy here as well. We now have a short-term, a long-term, and an extra long-term release cycle on this. This confused me when it first came out because I saw an end of sale, end of life notice on 6.5. And I'm like, wait a minute, why are we doing a end of sale on 6.5? Well, it's because that's a short-term release. And so any of the odd numbers that are in a FTD release are going to be falling into the short-term category, and they have a much shorter time horizon of when we're going to support that. And doesn't mean that 6.4, an earlier release, is not going to be supported anymore, like I used to think. We just kind of shifted over to this new lifecycle policy so that we have different teams that are actively developing and supporting these various versions of FTD, and we have a more predictable cadence then of when we're going to support new versions and new features in these different release sets. And a little bit more here on the extra long, and short-term releases that are out there. Suggested releases. Well, we're still going to come up with that. We're very quickly getting to a new suggested release or golden release. We're currently on 6.407, I believe. Not sure what the next one's going to be. This is all based upon feedback from customers, from partners, how many outstanding cases that we have going, et cetera. It's basically validated on a lot of that, but I would look to seeing this go from 6.4 to some version of 6.5 in the not too distant future. We have our technical programs that are out there to support partners and customers that are leveraging you and utilizing you. Sales side, the demos, design services, proof of values, right? Those are all covered in here. We still have dCloud out there. We have always-on instances of CDO and FMC in dCloud. We have our demo environment supported in dCloud. dCloud even supports POVs. That's part of what we're doing here on the Fire Jumper training is the POV side of this. And using what we have in dCloud in the cloud, so you don't have to go and deploy FMC appliances on-prem. You can leverage our resources in dCloud. On the technical side of things, the design services, we will help you review designs, and there's a design service that's out there. You submit your customer what the requirements are, and we'll actually kind of go into a workshop scenario, document that, and engage with you so that we make sure that we've got the right size platform and management out there for that customer so that they're going to be satisfied. We have had a change in the technical side of this where we were offering the design service online, and now we've kind of migrated off of that to just be supporting the proof of value and the sales incentives and the demo. So if you want to leverage design services, reach out to your Cisco SE or your channel SE, and on certain use cases there, we can still engage the business unit to go through those technical designs. But as of the end of July, the tools that you could use as a partner to directly request a design review with the business unit has basically the submissions through the portal after July 27th have kind of gone away. So that's why that's not on these slides anymore.
Craig, quick update.
Yep.
They've kind of rolled that into the proof of value service offering.
Okay, so if you want to do a proof of value and you want to leverage the design service, then you have to do a proof of value to integrate, or not integrate, but leverage and engage the BU on that. You don't just bypass the POV process. You're going to need to do a POV to leverage that design service. Is basically the message there. I already talked about this. I'm going down. Yeah, okay. POV, here's how you submit a request in the portal. It basically is a smart sheet. It will email you. And if you need any escalations on that, we have the wedeals@cisco.com email address that you can send to if you're not satisfied with the level of service that you're getting there and you need any kind of escalations with that. We'll end here with a lot of resources for network security. So there's a ton of stuff that's out there. The Sales Connect portal up there at the top is still a very, very good place to go in addition to the partner community. You have the various tabs there for the demo, design, POV, migration service. So that is out there on this URL. The partner community, as I mentioned, join that. That's where we update all the partners. Partners update and answer questions. The BUs answer questions. You've got the various roles that are in there with the Fire Jumper program, sales, system engineer, and field engineer, all our road shows and things like that. All of the security forums across the different platforms, whether it's IPS, firewall, they're highlighted here. And those are kind of rolled into what the latest posts that are going on out there. You can also, if you want to get notified when a new code base comes out, when there's a PCERT that comes out, when there's a field service notice that comes out, you can go out there and enroll in My Notifications and get notified of that automatically. All of the firepower guides, the ordering guides, the compatibility guide, this new 6.6 feature matrix, I mentioned that earlier. This is a phenomenal resource here. And this just recently came out at the end of July. I think I already have it up because I've downloaded it here, so I'll show you. This goes into that next level of detail about what's supported in the features for ASA, FTD, which managers support which ASA and FTD features. At high level up here, which we've already covered, so some of these slides you've already seen in this presentation, but you want to drill into now some of the specific features and what manager and version of that manager supports those features. It's all right in here. This is an awesome document. So they just recently updated this, I think at the end of July, the latest version of this, and this is all the way up to 6.6, okay? So I wanted to reference that. DevNet, we've got the link in there for the DevNet, as we mentioned earlier on. dCloud is your friend. dCloud's phenomenal. If you go out and log on to dCloud, we now have the latest postings. Just do your CCO login here. And if you want to pull up a demo for something like SecureX, just go out to dcloud.demo.cisco and go in. You can just type in SecureX. And now you've got your SecureX demo that's always on, an instant demo version of that. And you can now talk about the whole API integration and the orchestration story around not just firewall, but the entire portfolio. So that's pretty awesome. Recommend you get familiar with that. There's a couple videos that you can see on how to demo SecureX. Get to know it. That is our #1 go market right now. It's the complete integrated architecture story for Cisco, and it ties firewall in. Licensing support, you need RFP support. Partner help is out there for that. Boy, we just got a ton of support resources that are here. Do your own case support, your own self-service portal for partner self-service, that's out there. Quick start guide for technical services. Here I already showed you the feature comparison matrix. You can download that guide. There's dCloud demos, not just for SecureX, but for all of the other products. We're talking firewall here. There's a ton of stuff for firewall that's out there. You can run the Firepower Management Center, FMC demo, the always-on demo. That's a great one just to demo customers. But if you want to run labs, you can turn up your own labs and get into configuration and get familiar with different features and functions of FMC and FTD in the dCloud demo lab environment there. So with that, I have gone through a lot of information here. I hope that that was useful for you, that we've answered some of the questions in the Q&A panels. Keep posting them in there. If we can't answer them before the end of the session here, we'll get those posted out on the community or somehow get those back to you. Really appreciate everybody sticking with me. Brad, I think I can turn it back to you now.
Yes, thank you, Craig. That was an excellent overview. So we'll be taking a break now. Don't leave. The next part, starting at the top of the hour, we'll be getting into your Stage 4 labs, what you need to do, POV workshops, lab walkthroughs, and the new and updated lab guides. So again, we'll be starting back up at the top of the hour, 3 p.m. Eastern, I think noon Pacific. With that, we'll be taking our break.